The morning sun had just begun to rise over the academy grounds, casting long shadows across the towering metal gate where all new arrivals were expected to check in. But today, something felt different, tense, electric, as if the air itself sensed the storm about to unfold. A lone woman approached the entrance, her posture calm, her steps deliberate, her expression unreadable. She carried nothing but a small black folder and a quiet confidence that seemed to unsettle the few cadets lingering nearby. They didn't know her, they had never seen her before, and they had no idea that within the next few minutes, the Academy's entire future and the reputation of one particular officer would change forever. Before she could even greet the guard on duty, a voice barked from behind the gate. A tall, broad-shouldered cop with a history of unchecked arrogance stormed forward, his face curled in irritation. Instead of professionalism, he chose confrontation. Instead of procedure, he chose impulse. And in a moment that would echo across the academy for months to come, he raised his hand and slapped the woman across the face, never once imagining who she really was. Welcome back to Swift Tale, the place where real-life drama, powerful stories, and shocking twists come alive. And if you're visiting for the very first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because today's story will make you question everything you think you know about power, respect, and consequences. Are you ready for this one? Because it's a story that begins with a mistake, but ends with a lesson the entire academy would never forget. In today's tale, we uncover the events leading up to that shocking moment at the gate, an act driven by ego, prejudice, and unchecked authority. We follow the journey of a woman who arrived not as a trainee, not as a visitor, but as the Academy's newly appointed commander, a leader chosen for her brilliance, her discipline, and her unwavering commitment to justice. Yet she walked through those gates with no announcement, no introduction, no entourage, just the quiet expectation that she would be treated with the same dignity as anyone else. And what happened instead exposed the cracks not only in the officer who struck her, but in the very institution he claimed to protect. This story matters because it speaks to real issues: the danger of judging someone by appearance, the consequences of abusing authority, and the importance of accountability in every rank of law enforcement. It is a reminder that leadership does not always wear a badge, shout orders, or demand respect. Sometimes, leadership stands silently, watching, waiting, and revealing itself only when the truth forces the world to pay attention. So settle in, because what unfolds next is more than just a dramatic twist. It's a powerful journey of justice, humility, and transformation inside one of the country's toughest police academies. The police academy had always been a place of discipline, steel, and silence, where the sound of marching boots echoed through long concrete corridors, and every cadet learned that respect wasn't given, it was earned. Yet beneath the polished exterior of authority and order, the academy had its cracks. Whispers circulated about certain officers who held more power than they should, men whose tempers flared faster than their judgment, and whose authority went largely unchecked by supervisors who were too exhausted or too intimidated to intervene. And among all those figures, one name stood out more than the others: Officer Grant Dalton. Known for his intimidating presence and a voice that could slice through the morning air like a whip, Dalton had earned a reputation not through excellence, but through fear. Cadets avoided his gaze, staff avoided his questions, and anyone unlucky enough to cross paths with him understood that his authority was something he wielded like a weapon. Every morning at the academy began the same way. Cadets lined up in formation while instructors prowled the grounds, barking orders and enforcing discipline. But today, the cadence was off. Conversations were shorter, glances sharper, and even the usually confident trainees seemed uneasy. Word had spread that changes were coming: a new leadership structure, new policies, someone high-ranking being assigned to take control of the failing training system. Dalton hated change. He hated new rules, new faces, and above all, anyone who threatened the familiar power he had grown comfortable exercising without restraint. His insecurities, disguised as authority, manifested not in leadership, but in aggression, and it was only a matter of time before that aggression collided with someone who would not be intimidated. The staff had been instructed to remain professional ahead of the new commander's arrival, but nothing about Dalton was ever subtle. He stormed around the grounds that morning like a force of nature, snapping at cadets for the smallest mistakes and glaring at officers who dared question his tone. Everyone sensed he was on edge, though no one fully understood why. Maybe he felt the shift in leadership would expose his behavior. Maybe he sensed the end of his unchecked dominance. Or maybe, deep down, he knew that a confrontation was coming, one he couldn't bully or bluff his way out of. As cadets assembled near the entrance for morning drills, an uneasy silence settled over them. They had heard rumors about the incoming commander, but nothing concrete. Some expected a strict disciplinarian, others imagined a political appointee with more polish than experience. None of them expected the calm, quiet woman walking toward the gate at that very moment. And certainly, none of them expected that the Academy's most feared officer would greet her with the kind of hostility that would ignite the fiercest storm the Academy had seen in years. She walked toward the Academy gate with the quiet confidence of someone who had weathered storms far more dangerous than a training ground full of eager cadets and overconfident officers. Her name was Commander Maya Ellison, though no one then knew it, not yet. Dressed in simple civilian clothes and carrying only a black folder tucked under her arm, she looked nothing like the decorated leader she truly was. There were no flashy medals, no commanding uniform, no entourage to announce her presence. That was intentional. She believed that true character revealed itself when people didn't know they were being watched, and today she was watching closely. Her eyes scanned the Academy entrance with calm curiosity, absorbing every detail, the rigid posture of the guards, the nervous chatter of the cadets nearby, the tense energy lingering in the air like an unspoken warning. Maya was no stranger to environments like this. She had spent over 2 decades in law enforcement, rising through the ranks not by politics or favoritism, but by grit, talent, and a relentless commitment to justice. She had led teams through some of the most complex operations in the country, restructured failing departments, and earned the respect of people who had sworn they'd never salute anyone again. But beyond her accolades, what truly set her apart was her ability to lead with both strength and empathy. She was firm but fair, tough but principled. And today she was stepping into a role that required every ounce of her expertise, turning around a police academy deeply infected with arrogance, inconsistency, and outdated values. As she approached the gate, Maya paused briefly, her gaze drifting upward to the tall academy sign. She had been offered this position months earlier, but she hadn't accepted it immediately. She wanted to understand the deeper issues first. Reports of misconduct, power imbalance, and discriminatory behavior had troubled her. She had witnessed institutions fall apart from within, and she refused to lead blindly. So today she arrived early, quietly, casually, unannounced. She wanted her first encounter with the Academy to be unscripted and raw, a genuine glimpse into how officers treated those they believed held no power. Some cadets watched her with curiosity, whispering among themselves. She didn't look like their idea of someone important. She looked too calm, too composed, too unassuming. But what they didn't realize was that Maya had built her entire career on being underestimated and using it to her advantage. Every step she took toward that gate was deliberate, a test she didn't need to announce because life had taught her that truth revealed itself without explanation. Just as she neared the guard post, a sudden tension rippled through the air. Her trained instincts picked up on it immediately, the shift in tone, the heavy footsteps approaching from behind, the low growl of irritation carried in the wind. She exhaled slowly, already sensing what was coming. She had hoped the Academy wouldn't confirm the worst rumors on her first day, but fate seemed determined to set the stage early. And as Officer Grant Dalton barreled toward her with the force of a man accustomed to throwing his weight around, Maya Ellison remained still, steady, and unshaken, ready to let the Academy reveal exactly what kind of culture she was there to change. Officer Grant Dalton stormed toward the gate with his jaw clenched and his temper already burning hotter than the rising sun. He had spotted Maya from a distance and, in typical fashion, assumed the worst. To him, she looked like someone who didn't belong, a civilian wandering too close to the Academy entrance, someone who needed to be put in her place before she caused trouble. His boots pounded against the pavement as he closed the distance, each step fueled by irritation and the kind of unchecked confidence only a man who had never been challenged could possess. Maya turned her head slightly as he approached, offering a polite nod meant to diffuse tension, but Dalton didn't slow down. If anything, Her calm demeanor seemed to provoke him more. "What do you think you're doing here?" he barked, stepping directly into her path. His voice was loud enough to draw the attention of cadets nearby, who froze mid-conversation and watched with wide, uneasy eyes. Maya kept her tone even and respectful as she responded, explaining that she needed entry into the academy. But Dalton wasn't interested in explanations. He cut her off, demanding identification, then dismissing the folder in her hand before she could even open it. His hand waved aggressively toward the exit as he ordered her to leave the premises immediately. Maya tried once more, gently insisting he take a moment to listen, but that only intensified his frustration. Dalton hated being questioned, especially by someone he assumed had no authority. The tension grew thicker as a few cadets gathered near the sidewalk, whispering in disbelief. They had seen Dalton lose his temper before, but there was something different about this moment. He wasn't just angry, he was threatened. His pride was flaring, desperate to assert dominance in a situation that didn't require it. Maya, meanwhile, stood steady, maintaining her composure with the patience of someone who had dealt with far greater hostility in far more dangerous environments. But even she could sense that the situation was escalating faster than she expected. Dalton stepped closer, invading her space. "I said leave," he growled, his tone dripping with superiority. When Maya calmly replied that she had business inside, he snapped. Without warning, he swung his hand across her face in a sharp, violent slap that cracked through the air like a gunshot. Gasps erupted from the cadets nearby. A few officers watching from the distance froze mid-step. Time seemed to stop as the impact echoed across the gate, leaving a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Maya didn't stumble, she didn't raise her hands, she didn't even flinch. She simply inhaled deeply and lifted her chin, her eyes locking onto Dalton with a calmness that unsettled him more than any confrontation ever had. The force of the slap hadn't shaken her, but the truth behind what she had just witnessed had. In that single moment, Dalton had proven every concern she had about the Academy's culture, his aggression, his arrogance, his complete lack of respect for the person in front of him, and he had no idea, none, that he had just assaulted the highest-ranking officer he would ever answer to. The cadets looked between the two of them, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. Security guards stepped closer, unsure of what they were witnessing. Dalton, breathing hard, attempted to justify himself, accusing her of trespassing and refusing orders. But even as he spoke, he could feel it. Something wasn't right. The woman didn't look scared. She didn't look intimidated. She looked like someone who held far more authority than he could comprehend. And for the first time in a long while, a flicker of doubt crept into Dalton's eyes. The Academy was about to change forever, and this moment, this slap, was the spark that would ignite the transformation. For several long seconds, the entire Academy entrance stood frozen in a stunned, breathless silence. Even the early morning breeze seemed to pause as everyone tried to process what they had just witnessed. Officer Dalton, chest rising and falling with adrenaline-fueled breaths, stood with his hands still halfway raised, almost as if his mind hadn't yet caught up to what his body had just done. Maya Ellison remained completely composed. Her face, though stinging from the slap, held no hint of anger or fear. Instead, she watched Dalton with an expression of deep, unsettling calm, an expression that made a few cadets instinctively step back. It was the look of someone who was both silently judging and silently deciding. The security guards at the gate were the first to react. Two of them rushed forward, their hands hovering awkwardly between intervening and waiting for direction. They glanced at Maya for guidance, sensing something unusual about her presence, but she said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any command could. Dalton, seeing the sudden attention, tried to regain authority. She refused to identify herself. He snapped loudly, pointing at Maya as if she were a threat instead of a guest. "I followed protocol." She was resisting. "This is on her." His voice cracked slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but enough for Maya to hear the panic creeping into his tone. A few cadets nearby exchanged uneasy glances, whispering anxiously. They had seen Dalton lose his temper before, but never like this. This wasn't the assertive, intimidating instructor they were used to. This was a man scrambling to justify a mistake he had no idea would haunt him far beyond the academy walls. One cadet, a young woman in her first month of training, stepped forward as if to speak, then hesitated, fear flickering across her face. She knew what she had seen. Everyone did, but opposing Dalton openly, that was something few dared to do. Meanwhile, Maya slowly lifted the black folder she had brought with her. She didn't open it. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held it in one hand, her fingers resting gently on the edge, waiting. Her stillness unsettled Dalton even more. He kept speaking, rambling, really, claiming she was trespassing, that she was uncooperative, that she posed a security concern. But his words spilled into the air without structure, powered by fear rather than control. The more he spoke, the more the onlookers realized he wasn't defending protocol, he was trying to defend his pride. Moments later, the Academy's assistant director, Captain Rhodes, came power-walking down the entrance corridor after hearing frantic reports over the radio. He stopped mid-stride when he saw Maya, his eyes widening in recognition. Not a public recognition, he didn't say her name aloud, but the way he straightened himself and quickly approached her told everyone that she was not the harmless civilian Dalton had assumed. Dalton noticed Rhodes's reaction and felt a cold, creeping dread spread across his chest. "Ma'am, I didn't expect you so early," Rhodes said quietly, his voice trembling with respect. Dalton blinked, confusion momentarily wiping the anger from his face. "Ma'am, early, what was happening?" Maya simply nodded, offering no explanation. Her silence forced Rhodes to fill the space, and he swallowed hard before speaking again. "Let's continue this inside," he murmured, his voice cautious, almost apologetic. The cadets watching were baffled. Dalton was terrified. Something was very, very wrong. As Maya walked past Dalton toward the Academy building, Rhodes stepped aside for her with deference normally reserved for top officials. Dalton stood rooted to the spot, the weight of what he had done slowly settling into his bones. He suddenly felt small, smaller than he had ever felt in his entire career. For the first time, he wasn't sure if his badge, his rank, or his reputation could protect him. And he was right to be afraid. Because the woman he had just assaulted wasn't just important. She was the Academy's new commander. Long before Commander Maya Ellison ever stepped foot onto the Academy grounds, her name carried weight across every major law enforcement district in the state. Her rise through the ranks had never been smooth, never been favored, and certainly never been handed to her. Maya grew up in a neighborhood where police presence was inconsistent at best and hostile at worst. She learned early on that justice was not always blind, that it often depended on who was watching and who was willing to speak up. Instead of letting that reality harden her, she used it to fuel a lifelong commitment to fairness, integrity, and redefining what leadership should look like. From her earliest days as a patrol officer, she stood out not for being loud or demanding attention, but for her clarity of purpose and unshakable calm under pressure. While others reacted, she observed. While others shouted, she strategized. And while others fought to prove themselves, she quietly built a reputation based on results. Maya's career was marked by a series of high-pressure assignments that tested every ounce of her resilience. She led hostage negotiations that saved lives, dismantled criminal networks that had terrorized communities for years, and exposed corruption within departments that had been protected by decades of secrecy. These victories earned her medals, but what truly distinguished her was the respect she commanded from both her colleagues and the communities she served. She believed deeply in accountability, no matter the rank, no matter the uniform, no matter the history. "Authority isn't power," she once told a room full of young officers. "Responsibility is power. Integrity is power. How you treat people when no one's watching, that's power." And that belief shaped every decision she made. Her rise to leadership positions was not always welcomed. There were officers who resented her, not because she was unqualified, but because her presence highlighted their own shortcomings. Some were intimidated by her excellence, others were threatened by a black woman holding roles traditionally dominated by men who believed they were untouchable. But Maya never wavered. She didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't try to win over those determined to undermine her. Instead, she let her work speak, and it spoke louder than any opposition could. When the state began receiving troubling reports about the police academy, reports of unchecked aggression, discriminatory conduct, outdated training methods, and a culture more rooted in intimidation than discipline, her name was the first one recommended. The department knew the academy needed a leader who wouldn't be manipulated, intimidated, or influenced by politics. They needed someone who believed in rebuilding from the ground up. They needed someone strong enough to face the resistance that would inevitably rise from within. And there was no one more qualified or more feared by those who resisted change than Commander Maya Ellison. But Maya was cautious. She didn't accept the role immediately. She spent months reviewing incidents, internal memos, and disciplinary reports. She noticed a disturbing pattern: officers like Grant Dalton, men who acted more like gatekeepers of power than guardians of public trust. She knew stepping into this academy meant stepping into a battlefield disguised as a training facility. That was precisely why she chose to arrive early and anonymously. She wanted to see the academy at its rawest, without the polish of rehearsed greetings or forced professionalism. She wanted to know exactly what she was dealing with before she put on the commander's uniform. And now she knew. Dalton's slap was not just an act of aggression, it was a symptom of a culture that had been allowed to degrade, a symptom of an environment that nurtured arrogance over accountability, a symptom of leadership failures she had been hired to fix. As she walked deeper into the academy halls with Captain Rhodes trailing anxiously behind her, Maya understood that the task ahead would be immense. But she was not intimidated. This was the kind of challenge she had prepared her entire life for. And the academy had no idea just how much change was marching through its doors. News of the incident at the gate spread through the academy faster than the morning roll call siren. By the time Commander Maya Ellison reached the administrative wing, whispers had multiplied into full-blown rumors. Cadets lingered outside classroom doors, their eyes darting toward every officer who passed, hoping to catch a hint of what was unfolding behind closed doors. Some believed the woman had been a state inspector. Others thought she was a lawyer. A few suspected she might be connected to the governor's office. But none of them imagined the truth, that she was their new commander, appointed to overhaul their entire system. And the man who had slapped her was packing around the grounds, desperately trying to piece together why the atmosphere had shifted so dramatically. Inside the building, Captain Rhodes attempted to maintain composure as he escorted Maya to a private office. His voice wavered slightly whenever he addressed her, but Maya remained calm, composed, and silent. She didn't demand explanations. She didn't ask for apologies. She simply observed every expression, every hesitation, every crack in the academy's operations. Her silence made Rhodes nervous. He knew what it meant when someone in her position wasn't speaking. They were thinking, assessing, judging, preparing. Meanwhile, Officer Dalton was unraveling. At first, he walked around the academy with forced confidence, acting as if he had done nothing wrong. He told anyone who would listen that the woman had been hostile and refused to follow procedure, leaving him no choice. But as more officers began behaving strangely around him, avoiding eye contact, lowering their voices, stepping aside when he walked by, the cracks in his facade became impossible to ignore. Dalton's swagger weakened. His voice lost its certainty. He hadn't been informed of the investigation yet, but every instinct in him screamed that something had gone terribly wrong. By midday, the academy director called an emergency meeting. Instructors gathered in the conference room, some tense, others curious. The assistant director took his place at the front, clearing his throat nervously before announcing that an internal incident had occurred involving a civilian guest. Dalton stiffened when he heard the words, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. It felt as if his throat had been locked shut by dread. "Our guest is cooperating," Rhodes continued carefully, "and an investigation is already underway. All personnel who witnessed the incident will need to submit statements." Murmurs filled the room. Dalton felt sweat forming under his collar. He expected someone to defend him, someone to say it wasn't a big deal, that he'd been justified, that it was just another misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But no one said anything. For the first time, he felt alone. Outside the meeting room, cadets quietly filled out witness accounts. Many hesitated, torn between telling the truth and fearing Dalton's retaliation. But the sight of Rhodes rushing around nervously, the sudden presence of high-ranking officials, and the whispers that the academy was under review gave them courage. One by one, they submitted statements that aligned far too closely for Dalton's liking. He sensed his grip slipping. Meanwhile, Maya spent the afternoon requesting files, disciplinary records, academy reports, evaluation forms, and instructor logs. She did so without raising her voice, without stepping into the spotlight, without revealing her identity, but her presence alone shifted the energy of the entire building. Staff whispered her name when they thought she couldn't hear. Rumors started forming. She outranks the director. She's here from the state headquarters. Something big is about to go down. As the day progressed, the tension in the academy reached levels it hadn't felt in years. People walked softly, spoke quietly, and watched everything around them with nervous anticipation. Dalton tried to confront a few cadets who had witnessed the incident, but they avoided him. Some even stepped back when he approached. It rattled him more deeply than the investigation itself. He began to realize something terrifying. The culture that had once protected him was shifting. People were no longer afraid of him. They were afraid of what was coming. And Maya Ellison, the woman he had slapped without hesitation, was at the center of it all, silent, calculating, and waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth that would shake the entire academy to its core. The hearing room felt colder than usual, its stark white walls amplifying every breath, every footstep, every heartbeat pounding with dread. Officer Grant Dalton sat stiffly at the long oak table, his palms sweating against the polished surface. Hours earlier, he had stormed into this same room with the confidence of a man convinced his badge made him untouchable. But now, after the formal announcement of Commander Maya Ellison's appointment, his bravado had evaporated, leaving only fear and disbelief. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, her calm stare, her silence, the weight of her presence. He had slapped a commander, his commander. And the Academy's highest-ranking officials now sat across from him, with expressions that gave him no comfort. Commander Ellison entered the room without ceremony, her footsteps measured, purposeful, and unnervingly quiet. Every officer in the room stood automatically, except Dalton, who remained frozen in his chair. She took her place at the head of the table, unfolding a few documents before lifting her eyes to meet the room. A hush spread across the room, thick and absolute. Dalton swallowed hard. He couldn't understand how someone so composed could be so intimidating. There was no anger in her expression, not even frustration, just a sharp, unwavering clarity that made him wish she had yelled instead. Silence meant she was in control. Silence meant she held all the power. Officer Grant Dalton, she began, her voice steady but resonant, we are here today to address your conduct at the Academy Gate and to review your history within this institution. Her tone was professional, but there was something else underneath it, a disappointment that strung more deeply than rage ever could. As she read through the report, Dalton's stomach tightened. She recited the events factually, without embellishment. But hearing it spoken aloud by the person he had assaulted made every detail heavier. The Academy staff shifted in their seats, embarrassed by the very system they had allowed to fester under Dalton's unchecked behavior. Then came the part Dalton feared the most, his record. The disciplinary reports, the ignored red flags, the complaints from cadets who had feared retaliation, the questionable incidents that had never been properly addressed. Now under Maya's leadership, every buried complaint surfaced like skeletons dragged into the light. Dalton's chest tightened as she read statements from cadets, some trembling, some angry, some relieved to finally be heard. Dalton stared at the table, unable to lift his eyes. For the first time, he saw himself the way they saw him, not as an authority figure, but as a threat. When Maya finally paused, the room felt suffocatingly still. She folded her hands neatly, her calm demeanor unchanged, and addressed Dalton directly. Your actions at the gate were not a momentary lapse of judgment, she said. They were the culmination of a pattern, one rooted in ego, disregard for procedure, and a lack of respect for your fellow officers and the public. Her words cut sharper than any reprimand he had ever received. Yet she continued without cruelty, only conviction. This academy cannot function on fear. It cannot train officers who believe power is a weapon, and it cannot uphold standards if those entrusted to enforce them choose arrogance over integrity. Dalton's breath trembled. He braced himself for immediate termination, his mind racing with panic, his career, his reputation, everything slipping through his fingers. But Maya wasn't finished. However, she said, her voice softening in a way that unsettled him more than her firmness, I believe in accountability, not destruction. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing but oddly humane. You will be suspended, pending mandatory retraining and psychological evaluation. Your conduct will be monitored, and any further infractions will result in dismissal without appeal. If you wish to continue in this profession, you will rebuild your reputation from the ground up. Earn it not through intimidation, but through discipline. Dalton felt his throat tighten, relief and humiliation battling within him. She wasn't letting him off easily, not even close, but she hadn't ended his career either. She was giving him a chance, a difficult one, a painful one, but a chance nonetheless. And somehow that was worse than a clean break. A clean break required no transformation, but this demanded he become someone entirely different. As the hearing concluded, the room emptied quietly. Dalton remained seated for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything that had just unfolded. No one approached him. No one whispered or stared. They simply left him alone with the consequences he had earned. And as he finally stood and walked out of the room, he realized that the academy had already begun to change because of her. Commander Maya Ellison wasn't just here to punish him. She was here to rebuild the institution he had taken for granted. And whether he liked it or not, he would have to decide. Adapt or be left behind. The academy's gate stood quiet as the sun dipped behind the training grounds, casting long shadows over the courtyard where everything had begun. What had started as a reckless act of arrogance had unfolded into a moment of transformation, one that would ripple far beyond the walls of the institution. For Commander Maya Ellison, the day had not been about punishment or pride. It was about rebuilding a foundation cracked by years of misused authority and silent fear. Standing in her new office, she looked out over the grounds with a calm, determined resolve. She hadn't come to destroy the academy. She had come to reshape it into a place where leadership was earned, not inflated, where respect flowed both ways, where those sworn to protect understood that their first duty was to humanity, not dominance. For the cadets, the events of the day served as a lesson they would never forget. They watched how easily power could be abused, how quickly judgment could be clouded by bias, and how deeply one moment of ego could scar an institution's reputation. But they also witnessed something else, something far more important. They saw what true leadership looked like. Not loud, not boastful, not oppressive, but steady, composed, and grounded in principle. Commander Ellison's approach didn't just address the action, it addressed the culture. And in doing so, she reminded everyone present that greatness in law enforcement isn't measured by how much authority one wields, but by how responsibly one chooses to carry it. Officer Dalton, once the academy's most feared figure, left the hearing room a changed man. Whether he would rise to the challenge of rebuilding himself was a question only time would answer. But for the first time in his career, he was forced to look inward instead of down on others. And perhaps that was the greatest consequence of all, realizing that the uniform he wore was not a shield against accountability, but a responsibility that demanded humility. If he chose to grow, the academy would witness a transformation far more meaningful than any punishment could offer. In the days and weeks to come, the academy would evolve. New training protocols would be enforced. Old habits would be dismantled. Cadets who once walked the halls with fear would begin to walk with pride. And officers who once clung to power would learn that respect, once lost, must be earned back with integrity and discipline. Commander Maya Ellison intended to lead by example, strong, unwavering, and fair. Her presence alone was enough to remind everyone that leadership is not a title, it's a commitment. And as we close this chapter of today's story, one thing becomes clear. Sometimes, the most powerful change begins with a single moment, one unexpected, chaotic, and unforgettable moment that forces an entire system to reflect, reset, and rise again stronger. Thank you for joining us on this journey here on Swift Tale. If this is your first time watching, we hope this story moved you, challenged you, and made you think. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story. And most importantly, drop a comment below. Let us know what you think about the commander's decision, the officer's fate, and the lessons this academy had to learn the hard way. Your voice matters, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay aware, and stay inspired, because stories like this remind us that leadership, justice, and respect begin with the choices we make every day. The weeks following the incident at the gate marked the beginning of a transformation that no one at the academy had anticipated. Commander Maya Ellison moved quickly but deliberately, reviewing policies, speaking with cadets and instructors individually and observing training sessions firsthand. The air, once thick with fear and tension, slowly began to shift. Cadets who had walked the halls in silent anxiety now held themselves with a renewed sense of pride, inspired not by intimidation but by competence and fairness. Maya's presence was a constant reminder that leadership was not about size, rank, or aggression. It was about responsibility, accountability, and integrity. Even officers who had been resistant to change began to notice the difference. Those who refused to adapt found themselves sidelined, while those willing to learn discovered a leader who valued growth over punishment. One of the most significant changes came in the form of mentorship programs that Maya implemented immediately. She paired experienced officers with cadets, fostering relationships built on guidance, trust, and constructive feedback. The academy's culture began to shift, subtly at first, then more visibly as cadets embraced the principles that Maya insisted upon. Discipline was no longer an instrument of fear. It became a tool for growth, a method of teaching the next generation of officers the values they would need both on and off duty. Slowly, respect replaced fear, and morale, long at a historic low, began to climb. Maya knew that changing the culture would take time, but these first steps proved that transformation was possible when leadership was guided by principle rather than ego. As for Officer Grant Dalton, the aftermath forced him into reflection. The suspension and mandatory retraining had stripped him of his sense of untouchable authority. For the first time in years, he was forced to confront his behavior, to analyze how his arrogance had undermined not only his credibility, but the integrity of the academy as a whole. Under Maya's careful oversight, he began the painful process of rebuilding his professional reputation. It was not easy. Every mistake was scrutinized, every lapse met with firm correction, but it became clear that even the most resistant officers could change if they were willing to accept accountability and learn from their actions. The academy, under Maya's leadership, was proving that even those who had once hindered progress could be part of a new era if they chose to embrace it. The wider community began to notice as well. Parents of cadets, alumni, and local law enforcement leaders expressed growing confidence in the academy's direction. Maya's reforms were more than procedural, they were symbolic. They represented a commitment to fairness, to justice, and to the belief that every officer, regardless of rank or tenure, could be held accountable for their actions. Slowly, the academy began to rebuild its reputation, and the story of the Gate incident transformed from one of shame to one of inspiration, a cautionary tale turned lesson in leadership, humility, and integrity. Under Maya Ellison's guidance, the academy wasn't just correcting past mistakes, it was creating a blueprint for the future. The message was clear to every cadet and officer. Leadership was no longer measured by fear or dominance. It was measured by courage, accountability, and the willingness to do what was right, even when it was difficult. And as the academy moved forward into this new era, everyone, cadets, instructors, and officers alike, understood that the actions of a single day had set the stage for an institution fundamentally transformed. The era of intimidation was over, and a new age of principled leadership had begun. News of the incident at the academy gate did not stay confined within the academy walls. Within hours, local news outlets and social media platforms had picked up the story, broadcasting the shocking video and recounting the details of the slap that had ignited widespread attention. Headlines screamed across screens, "Officer assaults civilian at police academy, turns out she's the new commander, and arrogance meets accountability. Academy officer faces consequences." Public reaction was instantaneous and intense. Many expressed outrage at Dalton's behavior, condemning the aggression and lack of professionalism, while others marveled at Commander Maya Ellison's composed and decisive response. The story quickly went viral, not just as a sensational incident, but as a larger conversation about leadership, authority, and respect in law enforcement. Social media became a battlefield of opinions. Videos, analyses, and comment threads dissected every detail of the encounter. Some users focused on the slap itself, questioning how such a blatant act of aggression could occur at a training institution. meant to teach discipline and public service. Others highlighted Maya's remarkable poise, applauding her for handling the situation with unwavering professionalism rather than retaliation. Discussions about bias, respect for women in positions of authority, and the culture of police academies spread rapidly, drawing attention from legal experts, community leaders, and activists alike. Hashtags supporting Maya's leadership began trending, and stories of similar incidents in other institutions prompted broader debates about systemic reform. Traditional media outlets also weighed in, producing feature segments exploring the implications of the incident. Interviews with former cadets, police officials, and community members offered varied perspectives, but one theme remained consistent. The Academy's culture needed change, and Maya Ellison represented that change. Analysts praised her leadership style, noting her ability to assert authority without aggression, to command respect without intimidation, and to enforce accountability without vindictiveness. Meanwhile, Dalton's actions were examined as a cautionary tale, how unchecked arrogance and failure to respect others could derail a career and damage institutional credibility. Inside the academy, the viral attention brought additional scrutiny. Senior officials visited to assess the reforms Maya was implementing, while cadets were reminded that their actions, both on and off duty, were now part of a larger narrative being watched by the public. Maya welcomed the attention as an opportunity to reinforce the values she had come to instill: respect, professionalism, and ethical conduct. She emphasized that leadership was not about personal glory, but about shaping an environment where integrity and accountability became the foundation for success. The Academy's transformation was no longer just an internal story. It had become a public example, a model for reform, and a lesson for institutions nationwide. The wider law enforcement community took notice as well. Departments across the state discussed the incident in training sessions, using it to illustrate the consequences of misconduct and the importance of leadership grounded in principle. Maya's appointment and her handling of the situation sparked dialogue about diversity in leadership, the power of mentorship, and the potential for change in institutions resistant to reform. Her approach demonstrated that accountability and empathy could coexist with authority, a message that resonated far beyond the academy walls and reminded officers everywhere that true leadership demanded more than rank or badge. It demanded character. By the end of the week, the story had permeated every level of society. Citizens debated the importance of respecting authority while simultaneously holding it accountable. Media coverage continued to follow the progress of Maya's reforms, documenting the Academy's evolving culture and Dalton's rehabilitation. And through it all, one undeniable truth emerged. The incident at the gate had become a turning point, not just for a single officer or a single academy, but for an entire community seeking better, fairer, and more principled law enforcement. Commander Maya Ellison's leadership style quickly became the defining factor in the Academy's transformation. Unlike the traditional authoritarian approach many officers were accustomed to, Maya led with a balance of firmness and empathy, demanding accountability while also understanding the pressures her cadets and staff faced. She believed that leadership wasn't about fear, it was about earning trust, inspiring respect, and setting clear standards for conduct. Every decision she made, every policy she implemented, reflected a commitment to principle rather than ego. From her very first day, she had established that mistakes were opportunities for learning, but misconduct and abuse of authority would no longer be tolerated. This approach created an environment where cadets felt empowered to speak up, knowing their concerns would be addressed without retaliation. Maya's presence was both subtle and commanding. She would often walk quietly among cadets during drills, observing without interrupting, taking mental notes of behaviors and patterns. Unlike the previous culture of intimidation, where officers were expected to follow orders without question, she encouraged dialogue, questioning, and critical thinking. Cadets learned not just to follow rules, but to understand the reasoning behind them, why procedures mattered, why respect was essential, and why leadership demanded integrity at every level. Her mentorship programs paired experienced officers with cadets in structured sessions, emphasizing ethical decision-making, emotional intelligence, and practical skills. The change was palpable. Officers who had once relied on force or fear to maintain control were now challenged to lead with patience, strategy, and example. One of Maya's most notable strategies was her insistence on accountability being consistent and transparent. Every incident, no matter how minor, was reviewed with the goal of teaching rather than punishing whenever possible. Cadets quickly realized that favoritism or turning a blind eye was no longer tolerated. Officers who had previously operated with impunity began to adjust, understanding that their actions were being closely observed and evaluated. Even Officer Dalton, once the embodiment of unchecked arrogance, found himself under rigorous supervision. The process was difficult for him, forcing him to confront years of behavior that had gone unexamined, but it also offered a path for redemption that many officers in his position would have never imagined. Maya's leadership extended beyond procedural reforms. She modeled composure, resilience, and ethical decision-making in every interaction. When conflicts arose among cadets or staff, she mediated with fairness, never allowing personal biases to influence outcomes. Her ability to stay calm in the face of provocation, something Dalton had witnessed firsthand, became a blueprint for the entire academy. Cadets began to emulate her demeanor, understanding that true strength was not in aggression, but in measured action and thoughtful judgment. Through her guidance, respect replaced fear, and a culture of mentorship and mutual accountability began to take root. By the end of her first month, the results of her leadership were undeniable. Morale had improved, incidents of misconduct had decreased, and cadets and instructors alike recognized that the academy was no longer a place where fear dictated behavior. Maya Ellison had not only established authority, she had inspired it. Through a combination of discipline, empathy, and unwavering adherence to principle, she transformed a fractured institution into a model of professional and ethical law enforcement training. Her style became a lesson in itself. Leadership is not defined by power or position, but by the courage to lead with integrity and the vision to elevate everyone around you. The story of the incident at the Academy Gate extends far beyond the walls of the institution and the individuals involved. It serves as a powerful reminder of how power and respect are earned, not assumed. Officer Dalton's mistake was not merely a lapse in judgment. It was a reflection of a culture that had long tolerated arrogance, intimidation, and a lack of accountability. It demonstrated how authority, when unchecked, can become a weapon rather than a responsibility, and how one individual's impulsive actions can ripple outward, affecting an entire organization. But it also showed that true leadership, embodied by Commander Maya Ellison, is measured not by the ability to command fear, but by the ability to inspire respect, enforce fairness, and hold others accountable without losing integrity. This story reminds us that appearances can be deceiving. Maya arrived quietly, underestimated by those who believed that power could only be measured by physical presence, rank, or aggression. Dalton assumed dominance because of his badge and size, failing to recognize that leadership is far more than surface-level authority. The moment of confrontation was a turning point, a lesson that reverberates beyond a single academy or a single officer. Respect is not demanded. It is earned through consistent action, ethical behavior, and moral courage. Those who attempt to rule through intimidation often find themselves exposed, while those who lead with principle can transform not only institutions, but the lives of everyone within them. Equally important, the story underscores the value of accountability. Leadership is not simply a title, a uniform, or a position of power. It is a responsibility to guide, protect, and elevate those around you. Maya's approach demonstrates that holding others accountable doesn't require anger, vengeance, or humiliation. It requires fairness, clarity, and the courage to challenge systems and behaviors that threaten the integrity of the institution. Through her example, we see that true leaders create environments where people are encouraged to learn from their mistakes, correct their missteps, and grow into better versions of themselves. Authority without accountability is dangerous, Accountability without empathy is ineffective. Leadership that balances both is transformative. The lessons of this story resonate beyond the academy and beyond law enforcement. They remind us that every workplace, every team, and every organization can benefit from leaders who prioritize integrity, fairness, and empathy. They challenge us to reflect on how we wield authority in our own lives, whether as a manager, a mentor, or simply as a human being navigating relationships. The Academy's transformation illustrates that culture can change, that systems can improve, and that individuals can rise above outdated norms if the right example is set at the top. And at the heart of it all lies a simple truth. Respect, once earned, is more powerful than fear, and leadership built on principle endures far longer than authority built on intimidation. As we draw this story to a close, it's clear that the events at the Academy Gate were more than a dramatic confrontation. They were a powerful lesson in leadership, accountability, and the true meaning of respect. Officer Dalton's impulsive aggression and the culture that enabled it revealed how easily authority can be misused, while Commander Maya Ellison's calm, principled response demonstrated that real power comes from integrity, courage, and the ability to inspire others. The Academy's transformation serves as a reminder that change is possible, even in institutions long resistant to reform, and that one decisive, ethical leader can shift an entire system for the better. Her approach shows that accountability does not have to be cruel, and that discipline guided by empathy can cultivate respect, loyalty, and lasting improvement. For cadets, instructors, and officers alike, this story is a blueprint for what leadership should be: firm but fair, commanding yet approachable, disciplined yet compassionate. It reminds us all, whether in law enforcement, business, or everyday life, that the choices we make in moments of power define not only our own character, but the culture of the institutions we serve. Sometimes it takes one unexpected, unforgettable encounter to illuminate the weaknesses in a system and to spark the change that so many have been waiting for. Maya Ellison's leadership at the Academy shows that courage, wisdom, and composure are far more influential than fear, and that respect earned is far more enduring than fear imposed. If this story resonated with you, made you reflect, or simply left you inspired, we invite you to join the conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments. How would you have handled a situation like this? What lessons about leadership and accountability stand out to you the most? And while you're here, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Swift Tale so you never miss another story that challenges, inspires, and entertains. Stories like this remind us that transformation begins with awareness, leadership begins with principle, and every one of us has the power to make a positive difference when we act with integrity. Thank you for watching, and remember, true leadership doesn't demand respect, it earns it.